Am I recording? Oh, I am recording. Okay. Am I recording? I am recording. Okay. I normally only use this function for my classes, but I wanted to specifically cover a couple of things. So I'm going to use this meeting classroom setting in order to share my screen so I can show you guys specifically what I want to talk about. But peace and love, how y'all doing? Today is Saturday, February 29th. I pray that this message reaches you in the best of health, spirit, and mind. I am ZaZaAli. Welcome to my platform. I have a feeling, as with all times, when you talk about things that pertain to pop culture and celebrity culture, a lot more people tune in, opposed to when you're talking about the boring stuff that I like to talk about, like God and spirituality and consciousness, frequency, energy, and all that good stuff. So welcome. And hopefully you guys will gain something from this conversation. If nothing else, then a different perspective. Subscribe. Share the video if you find it intriguing or if you want to continue a discussion on another platform. I welcome that. I welcome disagreeing. I don't welcome disagreement. That's the wrong thing. I welcome differing opinions and perspectives. I just ask that everybody keep it civil and keep it respectful in my comments. This is a subject that is tricky because, well, it's not tricky. Truth is truth. And my perspective is my perspective, and I stand on everything that I'm about to say. But I also am in a space right now where I am very mindful of my energy. I'm very mindful of my words and the impact that they have and how I use them. And I am 1000% focused right now on radiating and resonating love. And so anytime you kind of start talking about things that are trending topics, hot topics, etc., or things that polarize, different communities, different mindsets, then you the waters start to get a little tricky because now you have to possibly defend your perspective. People start making videos to your video, and I don't do none of that. If you ever hear me respond to someone or actually mention their name in my videos because of something that they said, it's because I have a certain level of respect for them. So the fact that I am mentioning Amanda Seal's name particularly, and I know she's controversial, and I know some of you guys can't stand the ground she walks on, whatever. I have a high level of respect for her as an intellectual. I think she's funny. I think she's dope. I don't always agree with everything she says, but I don't always agree with everything that anybody says. So I am going to offer my perspective on a video that she posted yesterday. And in full disclosure, I did not watch the real show, so I don't know the precepts of this conversation, but I'm responding to the video that she posted on her Instagram, which I'm going to show you guys, and then I'm going to respond to that. And then I'm also going to talk about the Dwayne Wade situation with his son, more so from a long-term culture, spiritual perspective. As a mother, I know for an absolute fact that it is 100% a waste of time for people to try to impose their parenting ideologies on other parents, unless they ask for it, unless they invite different perspectives. That's one of the reasons why I've kind of steered away from talking about it, because number one, we're talking about a child here, and there's way too much information swirling around this child, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, hateful, vengeful. I would never, ever, 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 ever put my child in a position where they had to, in such a young and malleable and innocent space, have to defend themselves, whether it's in public, whether it's in private messages online, whether it's with people at school, whether it is energetically. And a lot of this stuff that's happening right now is energetic. There's a spiritual war that's happening. So when we thrust our children out into the limelight, for whatever reason, we make them susceptible to energies that are beyond their reasoning, beyond their understanding, and beyond their level of defense, right? So I'll get into that. But I was very careful about talking about this because, again, we're talking about a child here. And I see people touting, this young boy expressing himself and his you know, his decision or his own personal perspective of who he is, which he has his every right to do, especially because his parents support it. But, you know, let's be careful about, you know, espousing this idea that 11-year-olds now are touting wisdom that is beyond anything we've ever seen before. Like, you have to experience ignorance in order to attain wisdom. You know what I'm saying? And that doesn't take anything away from, you know, the innocent pureness and wisdom that children have, where they are naturally more geared towards and attached to the center, if you will, of what we call God. But I'm seeing people talk about how this young boy is, you know, so intelligent, and like he's spearheading or championing, you know, some new revolution of star seeds that are sexually ambivalent. Like, we got to be careful with that, because, you know, I have a son. I know where he was at 11. He was highly intelligent in certain regards, and, you know, a leader in his own right, very emotionally mature. But his room also smelled like basketball socks, you know what I'm saying? And you know, he was still a child, you know what I'm saying? So that'll come in just a second. I'm going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk too long. Shout out to everybody that joined me in the life visioning group coaching session today. Much love to you guys. We had a great class. I ended up talking for 2.5 hours, way longer than I intended to, but I think we covered a lot of bases. Next class is next month, at the end of next month. So if you're interested, you can go to my website and get more information. Last thing, Change Your Mind workbooks shipped out last week, and we will be shipping the remaining orders on Monday. So if you are not aware, this is a 134-page full color workbook that is focused on internal reflection. It's a metaphysics workbook, and it will help you to figure out maybe why you're stuck, why you're struggling with attaining a certain level of peace, or getting to the next level of your consciousness, and tools and tips and ideas and mindsets and high energy colors and vibration and energy and frequency to help you get to the next level of your life. The Science of Self Volume 1, Mind. We shipped a bunch of those off at the end of last month as well. This is a 91-page full color workbook. And then The Science of Sex, which is a 70, I should know this, is a 61-page full color workbook based on a spiritual reflection and a metaphysical perspective when it comes to the subject of sex. So order shipped out last week, and if your order has not shipped yet, it will ship out early this week. Okay, thank you guys for your patience. So real quick, I want to show this video clip of Amanda Seales for full context, to make sure that we don't put any words in her mouth, and that we give her full, you know, give her the floor in order to show and prove, you know, whatever her perspective was. So let me bring that video up. All righty. Where's my... Here we go. Share my screen. All right, here we go. Okay, here we go.
So I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. I said I would continue the conversation that was started on The Reel today, when we talked about why homophobia is so prevalent in the Black community. I want to make it clear that I am not an expert on this. I'm not an academic in this field. I'm not a researcher. This is simply my theory from my thoughts as someone who lives in the society and as someone who has studied other things that are adjacent to this conversation. I'd also like to ask, please do not form an entire opinion if you do not watch this entire video. I know folks love to watch 2 seconds and be like, then they got blog posts and Instagram posts and group chat conversations. This is simply a video voicing my theory on something, and you can agree or disagree, but make sure you watch it in its entirety before you decide one or the other. I believe that homophobia is prevalent in the Black community because from slavery on to now, so from slavery to emancipation, Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws to now, Black men have consistently been emasculated by the oppressor. And when I say emasculated, there are many ways in which that has been done. From slavery, where we see the terror of being beaten, being raped, of having to see their women raped, seeing their women taken from them, their children taken from them, seeing their rights not even be existent, seeing their personhood, their autonomy, their power of their own destiny completely stripped of them. Continuing to see that in the many ways that is carried through with laws, with the prison industrial complex, with chain gangs, you name it. So when we talk about emasculation, we have seen men, particularly Black men in this country, continuously put in a position of powerlessness, continuously put in a position of being treated as if they do not have the power to be the masters of their own destiny. My theory is that the other part of society that was considerably in this position for this entire time have been women. Women were also considered powerless and second-class citizens and not worthy of their own autonomy and identity. I believe that homophobia comes from the consistent emasculating of men, Black men, by not only all of those ways that they were being treated, but by also juxtaposing them in society against women who were looked at as powerless and weak, etc. Imagine the mindfuck of being a Black man who is simultaneously enslaved and later feared and later incarcerated because of their strength, their force, and their power, being rendered powerless, being treated as thoughtless, and being considered as useless. Well, women were treated the same way, even though it was simply not true. I think this continued trend of emasculating Black men to feel the powerlessness that they have put women in the position of sparks the homophobia that we see today, because when gay men exhibit certain feminine traits, or gay men are receivers like women are considered to be in a sexual space, I think a lot of Black men look at that as gay men carrying forth the desires and wishes of the oppressor in emasculating Black men. I think they look at gay men as aligning themselves with a vision of woman weakness that the oppressor tried to enforce onto all Black men. And when it comes down to the bone bristle, we know the facts, right? That the oppressor be lying and brainwashing, and the biggest side effects of that are those of us who carry out their brainwashed thoughts amongst each other. Fact of the matter is, Black men are powerful. Black men are strong. Black men are not weak. Women are powerful, are strong, and are not weak. That's why so much effort has been made to shut Black men and women in general down. Patriarchy, slavery, etc. All of that, tools to keep folks in power who are afraid that if these other folks who have power know their power, they will then take them out of power. Listen, they wouldn't try so hard to stop you if you weren't worth stopping. And gay men, by living their truths, are not carrying out the narrative of the oppressor, because the oppressor's narrative was a whole ass lie anyway. Massa been gaslighting us the whole time. So we must always remember that first and foremost, we have to get that out of the way before we can get on the way to living in unity. For the record, I could have rhymed unite, but I chose not to because I felt like I was doing too much. Now, again, as I mentioned, I am not a scholar on this topic. I am a thinker, however, and I'm sure there are other very relevant contributing factors, religious beliefs for one, but I feel like what I just spent the last 6 minutes explaining is that of why homophobia is so prevalent in the Black community.
All right, so I'm going to stop that there and let me bring myself back. Okay, so you heard her explanation, and again, I follow Amanda Seals. I don't follow anybody that I don't rock with in one way or another. I think she is a highly intelligent sister. You know, she has her moments, but we all have our moments. You know what I'm saying? But she's much more worthy. She brings a lot to the table, too much to the table to just be disregarded, which is why I'm addressing her in the first place. She probably won't see this, but the people who see this is who I'm aiming for in order to give a balanced perspective, because I'm seeing a lot of floating in the wind, a lot of followers following followers, following followers, following followers, and the narrative is being shaped and arranged not towards truth, but towards people's truths, right? Or towards an agenda. And when I say an agenda, that's multi-layered. For instance, just for an example, she said the oppressor's narrative, um, gay men have nothing to do with the oppressor's narrative. Well, I would question that, only because, and this is just responding to her direct question, to her direct perspective, birth control and sterilization in the Black community has always been the quote unquote oppressor's narrative. And I don't call anybody oppressor. So anytime I use that word, I will say quote unquote slave master, quote unquote plantation, quote unquote, because none of that reverberates where I am in my life and in my understanding right now. But part of the quote unquote oppressor's narrative was absolutely sterilization and birth control. So the if you identify as an LGBTQ person, then that does mean that you will not be, you know, populating the planet, so to speak, as far as giving birth, Black people giving birth, etc. But that's not the point. But I'm just saying, like, her narrative, that particular narrative, like, no, that's absolutely not true. In the scientific intervention in our affairs, I talk specifically about, you know, Planned Parenthood, them having a multitude of abortions that were directly centered in the Black community, as well as the overwhelming studies and tests that were done by Tyrone Hayes as far as Syngenta and atrazine, the pesticides that are found on most of our corn, and the impact that it's having on the male anatomy. Him juxtaposing it to his studies on toads, as well as the extensive studies and research that have been done worldwide that have been showing that there is a large number of animals, polar bears, fish, and different animals in different parts of the wildlife that are now starting, the males are starting to express feminine anatomy as well as feminine traits, meaning that they are seeing polar bears and different animals that are naturally male that are now showing female genitalia as well as being attracted to the same sex. And these scientists connect that back to the water, the hormones that are in the water. You know, most of Americans, half of America is addicted to some sort of prescription pill one way or another. When those pills, you know, use the bathroom, it goes into the water runoff. The water goes into a filtration system. The filtration system doesn't purify the water. So some of those chemicals are still in our tap water. We drink it, or other people drink it. I don't drink tap water, but you get what I'm saying. So there is an extensive amount of research and scientific information that should cause all of us, not only straight people, but everybody, as far as humans are concerned, where we should be taking a step back and looking at what's happening for the sake of humanity. And I'm really curious to know, this is just a side note, if Dwayne Wade, when he went and did his research on behalf of his son and this new identity, if he actually researched the work of Tyrone Hayes, if he researched the work of these scientists that have been talking about the physical anatomy and what's happening on the planet with our plant life and our animal life, as well as the extensive testimonies of people who decided to have sex changes or who changed their mind later on after identifying as, you know, transsexual, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Amanda's narrative is that she believes that the pervasive homophobia in the Black community stems from Black men being emasculated, being powerless, dealing with the enslavement and the fear and incarceration and all of the variations of what Black people in America, particularly, have been through, and that has caused a sort of psychological schism in reaction to this concept of homosexuality. Well, my first argument against this narrative is that why are we only starting with our culture in America? Why are we only pinpointing how we felt about this subject or the condition of this subject or the community of civilization of population of LGBTQ people? Why are we not addressing this from a pre-America perspective? And it's surprising to me because I know that Amanda Seals is a history student. I don't know if she studied pre-America or if she just focused particularly on Black studies in America, but my emphasis was studying ancient African civilizations as well as indigenous cultures from around the world. So when you look at ancient African civilizations and historical, indigenous cultures around the world, it is very, very, very difficult to find any sort of verifiable, prevalent, identifiable, like it's difficult to pinpoint any time during these histories and these civilizations where we can look and say, see, there was a prominent LGBTQ community in Shanghai or in Mali, or there was a prominent LGBTQ community in South Africa, or there was a prominent LGBTQ community in Kemet, or there was a prominent LGBTQ community in South America in the indigenous times. Like you can go through and find like a needle in a haystack. Like there is they call it a fillet or stele. It's basically a chip off of a monument, right? In Kemet. In Kemet, they wrote everything down. Everything's written in stone, right? So they found a fillet or a filet, hope I'm saying it right, of supposedly two men holding hands. And this has been they've used this one little piece of material that they found, and it's broken. So we don't even know if it's an original piece, or if it's fabricated, or if it was just two men holding hands with some sort of cultural connection. It's not far-fetched that men in other countries and in other, in African communities particularly, hold hands, and it's not seen as any, sort of sexual connotation. It's a familial family, sort of kindred connection, but it doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation. Now, let me pause for a second. So I meant to say this in the beginning. I don't believe I believe in living and letting people live. If whatever you identify with sexually, whatever your sexual connotation, who you love, it is absolutely not my role or responsibility to judge or to try to project on you who I think you should be or what I think you should be. I believe in living and let living. And I also believe in vibrating on and radiating love. That's what I'm all about, 100%. So I also believe that as an intellectual and as a scientist, that we can't change or twist history, number one, and we can't ignore our roles and responsibilities in the culture and the climate that we are creating, whether directly or indirectly, and the impact that it's going to have. The African proverb says that we are supposed to be preparing for 7 generations ahead of us, 7 generations ahead of us. So I feel that it's my role and responsibility when I hear things that are offsetting the culture, that are lacking balance. And when it comes to this particular subject, we are extremely off balance when it comes to allowing all perspectives to be heard, respecting all perspectives, and somehow in the hierarchy of humanity, and when I say hierarchy, I mean everyone was created through a man and a woman. This is the inception. There's no question about it. So, as the Bible says, honor thy mother and thy father. All cultures reference honoring your parents. Somehow the parent community, meaning man and woman, has been put in a backseat position of being able to talk about, analyze, work through, and assist in helping to cultivate where the culture is right now and where the culture is moving forward. And particularly for me as a woman and as women, it is our responsibility in acknowledging that responsibility and using our voices and our platforms to not only be mindful of our personal lives, our personal families, and where we are today, but where are we going to be 7 generations from now? And I really find it so ironic that, it's Black History Month. We talk so much about Black love, Black culture. We model the African clothes, the dashikis. We talk about the Adinkra symbols and all of the surface aspects of African culture, but we really do not respect the spiritual connotation and the respect that they had for the spiritual laws, right? If you look at the Ankh, which is on the front of my workbook, this symbol represents life, right? And depending on who you're talking to, there's different interpretations about, the circle part representing the womb, the bottom part representing the phallus, and then the middle section is where they combine in order to create life. There's different interpretations of what that symbol means, but I don't think anybody would argue that it doesn't reference life and the importance of life. So my question for Amanda and for everybody who is embracing all of these very liberal-minded and modern reflections of where we are moving as a society, because remember, human beings are an ecosystem. So it's not you over there and us over here. What you do over there affects over us over here and vice versa. I'm raising a son in America. He's going to be moving and grooving and meeting people and having experiences. So everything is relative, right? And again, I'm speaking from love, and I'm speaking very intentionally with my words so that I can make sure that I reach you where you are, regardless of your sexual orientation, etc. So from that perspective, how does Amanda Seales know that the quote unquote homophobia, and I'm going to get to that in just a second, the quote unquote homophobia in the Black community, instead of it stemming from emasculation of Black men and stemming from incarceration and stemming from brutality and everything that we've experienced, how do we know that homophobia in our community is not because we have an allegiance to this? Whether we know it consciously or subconsciously, or whether it's something rooted in our DNA, that we as a people know that we have a role and a responsibility to this. And why would you stop at conceptualizing where we are as a people today as a student of history and not take into context where we came from and what we came from and what we were before we came in contact with Europeans and with slave culture? Now, Africans were the most tolerant, historically tolerant people of any culture. So when, for an example, when the Moors went up in Spain, right, Africans, some Muslims, and then some African based in African spirituality, right? When they went into Europe and they civilized Europe, they were extremely religious tolerant, meaning if you were a Christian, if you had a different form of worship, whatever your particular worship was, they did not impose their religion on them. They did not force them to develop African customs. They allowed them to continue on their personal customs. They did not try to force who they were as a culture and as a people on any of the people in European culture. So this is why the ongoing aspects of European culture in those areas, in certain areas of Italy, in certain areas of Rome, and in certain areas all throughout Spain, they still maintain the integrity of their culture, the integrity of their religion, etc. Same thing in Africa. When the Greeks came to study underneath the pharaohs in Kemet, they did not force them to take on African culture. They did not force them to renounce their culture or their religion. They allowed them to come and study up under them. And they went back to Europe and they shared with their culture and their people what they learned from Africans, right? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why would a people and I'm only focusing on Africans particular because Africans by far have the most extensive historical record for us to look back through time to figure out how it was in the beginning, like where we came from. We don't, like, we didn't just pop out of nowhere. There's a chronology of events. There is a chronology of events and a hierarchy of how things work. Black people, indigenous people being here first, being the mothers and fathers of civilization. We love to tout that, but what is the role and responsibility that actually comes with that? Then what was our perspective from that close to the center of creation, so to speak? What was our state of mind when it comes to these particular subject matters? And it doesn't mean that we don't evolve and things change. I'm going to get to that in just a second, but we still have to respect the hierarchy. We still have to respect the chronology. We still have to respect our mothers and our fathers, right? So, religiously tolerant all throughout the continent, going to other lands, having full access of doing as they pleased, no real enemies, no one to really challenge the thrones, right? They ruled for 700 years with no real opposition, and we're still extremely tolerant of the cultures and the people. This is our lineage. This is our history, and this is our culture. And I will not stand by and continue to allow this narrative to be shaped as what's wrong with them. Why are they not doing what everybody else is doing? Because we are the mothers and fathers. You understand what I'm saying? So whether we know it or not, consciously or subconsciously, and I'm not saying there's not riffraff and just idiots that are stupid, that just don't respect life, don't respect your opinion. And yeah, of course there's that. That goes without saying. But follow where I'm going with this. In the Kabbalion, and you guys have heard me talk about this before, where it talks about the closer to the center you are, the freer you are, and the further away you are from the center, the more you are bound to in being in prison, right? So there's a spiritual element to that, and there's a physical element to that as well. Because we were the first people, we are naturally closer to the center, meaning what God, what this consciousness, what this creator, whatever your concept is of a divine energy, divine mind. If you think it was the Big Bang Theory, if you think it was just science, if you think it was a religious connotation, a spiritual connotation, whatever your precepts are, we were here first. There's no question about that. Now, we can argue about natural selection and evolution, which none of that has been proven, and I could make a strong point about that, but that's besides the point. Us being closest to the center, right? Being the first, having created the subsets of culture, having created the hierarchies of civilization, right? Could it possibly be that the quote unquote homophobia in the Black community is because who we are spiritually and naturally is rooted in that being closest to the center? Could it be that somewhere in the recesses of our mind and in our genetic DNA, our affinity and our loyalty is to this? And again, I'm not speaking for the psychopaths online looking to argue. I believe in living, loving, and letting people live and experience life however they choose to experience it. And particularly over the last 3 to 4 years, as I have really leaned into spirituality and looking at the world from a spiritual lens, the smallest part of who we are, this very small part, this physical life incarnation that we're living, your physical life, you live 20 years or 40 years or 60 years or 100 years. This is a blip on the map when it comes to the fullness of who you are as a soul, as a spiritual being, and you being, in rotation, so to speak, for 100,000 years, maybe 1,000,000 years, your soul. You know what I'm saying? So when I started to look at it from that lens, of course, and then recognizing that in the physical realm that we come here and have a certain experience that is going to expand our soul, certain aspects, or kinks in the matrix is not the right word. Certain aspects of our soul come here to have certain life experiences for expansion. So you might come here and have an experience as a mother that expands you, or as a you know, as a ruler that expands you, or as a preacher that expands you, or as a wife that expands you, or as a gay man that expands you, or as a child, a victim of molestation that expands you, right? Everything we're going through in the physical realm is all a part of the soul's expansion. So when I started looking at it like that, and of course, being a victim of being judged in so many different ways by so many different strangers that don't know absolutely nothing about me, it curved the way that I approached certain subjects as well as my judgments. Because you can tell a person until you're blue in the face what they should be doing, what they could be doing. But when it all boils down to it, everybody has free will and has the right to live their lives however they choose to live it. I respect that. That's why we're all here. So it would be a complete waste of time and energy for me to sit here and try to tell anybody what they could or should be doing with their life. I don't do that. I radiate from a space of love. I want people to live vibrant, happy, and free, whatever that means. Now, period. Put a period and make sure you quote that if you take this video into another circle that it may be misinterpreted, right? That does not give us the right or alleviate our responsibility to history, our responsibility to science, and our responsibility to the truth. So understanding that these Africans were extremely tolerant, right? Understanding that there is very, very, very little, if any, representation of homosexual culture in indigenous cultures. And if there is, and there are sprinkles scattered throughout, you know, academia, so to speak. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, it was never anywhere. No, yeah, there are some situations that happen in different places. There was a tribe of women in Africa that were marrying other women, but they weren't marrying women because they were lesbians. They were trying to keep the wealth and the power structure, so to speak, passed on through a female lineage. There's certain instances throughout history where we can find certain situations where we can say, oh, okay, you know, exception to the rule, exception to the rule. But we're talking about a needle in a haystack, searching for a needle in a haystack. And again, there's no right, no wrong. I'm just talking about pure facts, history, science, right? Okay, so extremely tolerant. Greeks and Romans come into Africa to study. Do we not think that Africans knew that the Greeks and the Romans were extremely prone to, particularly in the men, homosexuality, and they were also prone to having pedophilia and having sex with boys? Do we not think that Africans knew that when they came into Africa and studied them? Do we not think that they were, who were obviously the more grand civilization, the more established culture, do we not think that they knew that this stuff was happening in Europe? They didn't write about it. They didn't judge. They did not enforce upon them their concepts of male-female dichotomy, relationships, etc. There is no extensive writing when it comes to how we viewed Europeans that would give off any sentiment of not being tolerant or identifying with that way of life. So this is what they were doing up there was not the same as what we were doing down here. And we know because they wrote everything. They literally kept the largest, most extensive historical data when it came to what they ate for dinner, the type of perfumes that the women wore, like basic things that we do on a day-to-day basis. They were writing this and inscribing it in the walls, right? So, and at this time, we're dealing with people that did not have media, no social media. There's no culture halfway across the world that's looking at them and analyzing what they're doing and telling people what's right, what's wrong, or you should be doing this way, that way. No, we're talking about full autonomous cultures that are governing themselves, that are trying their best to stay close to the center while at the same time veering away from the center, which is why Kemet eventually fell, which is why the Moors in Spain eventually fell, because they moved away from the precepts that gave them power in the first place. But I'm getting besides myself. And not to put all of this on Europeans, right? And I don't like to romanticize African cultures. We had African kings in Spain with thousands of concubines. You know what I'm saying? It's not far-fetched to think that as a man and as a king who is not challenged in any way, who has everything that he could possibly want and more, plus 1,000 or 5,000 concubines, that your internal manhood starts to get a little testy and wants to start testing the waters because you're bored. That's not far-fetched. I'm getting besides myself, but I think you guys get the point that I'm making. So anyway, Greeks and Romans doing whatever they're doing in Europe. Africans extremely tolerant. You look at the Native Americans here, the indigenous Native American cultures, you look at the Native people from around the world, there is no full-fledged understanding, articulation, cultural reverence for what we consider homosexuality or the LGBT community. And I say that acknowledging that there were needles in a haystack here, situations there, right? So homosexuality as we know it today is a mutation of the human experience. What do I mean when I say mutation? A mutation is, well, in science, it's about the restructuring of a gene, right? When a gene splits off and becomes a subset of a gene or takes on a different, actually, let me see. I pulled the definition up just so I can be on top of my game. Okay, mutation. The changing of the structure of a gene resulting in a variant form that may be transmitted to subsequent generations caused by the alteration of single base units in DNA or the deletion, insertion, or rearrangement of larger sections of genes or chromosomes. Why do I say homosexuality is a transmutation? Because it is. Because man and woman creates life, and without man and woman, there is no life. But through the process of evolution, through our, the things that we've experienced in this country and other countries around the world, things change, people grow, people evolve, things happen. This is not a right, wrong, or judgment or anything like that, not at all. This is a part of our reality, mutation. You can have a spiritual mutation, a physical mutation, a emotional mutation, etc. So the mutation has happened and is happening, but we have to understand that the natural inclination or the spiritual laws or the proper understanding or the nutrition or the guidance or the wisdom or the center or the essence of being when it comes to where we are as a culture of human beings and our planet and ultimately our universe has to come from the organic self. It cannot come from the mutation. What am I saying? I'm not saying that LGBTQ community is not in a position to be some of the finest minds on the planet. Absolutely not. I'm not saying that we can't be led or learn from or grow from or love anyone that identifies as LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not at all, especially from somebody who is claiming to resonate love and to be fully about love. I'm saying that the issues that our planet are experiencing and the off balance, the off kilt, the extreme spiritual dissatisfaction and the suffering of the masses of people on this planet, the remedy is going to come from the original, which is man and woman. Meaning that through our wombs as women and our connection with men, we are going to give birth to the children that are going to pull us out of this madness. The opposition to the people that created chemtrails, the people that created HAARP, the people that created the coronavirus, all of this madness that's happening on our planet, the earthquakes, the fires, man-made or organic, right? The answers to the issues that are happening on our planet right now on a major spiritual scale have to come through the womb of a woman by way of the connection of man and female. That needs to be at the forefront of our understanding as we contextualize where we are as human beings. And with that being said, those people that identify as quote unquote straight, those of us who take the responsibility of giving birth to new nations and of spiritually leading and guiding and being academics and using our voices in our platforms, have to move and operate with the LGBT community and everybody from a position and a space of love. So everything that I'm saying right now is love, but I am emphasizing this point right now because how did the parents of this ship get put at the back of the bus, where now we can't talk, we can't question, we can't analyze, we can't think about what happened historically and how history plays into this, what our ancestors were doing, how religion plays a role, how spirituality. We're sitting in the back seat now, allowing a culture, and I'm not talking about LGBTQ community, I'm talking about the culture, American culture, which is pop culture, trending culture, people scared to speak their truth, people following whatever some random person is saying, the person with the most followers, people not being, having the wherewithal to speak their personal truth, or to question things that sound funny to them, or to question things that may not be in alignment with their understanding of truth or God or consciousness. How in the hell did we end up sitting in the back seat watching everything take place, and everybody's scared to ask questions or to talk about what's uncomfortable for them? There's a video, let me show you guys this just to reiterate this point. There is a video, and I saw this on Holly Berry's Instagram because I follow her. What is it called? Boomerang, I think. There's a new show. Nope, that's not it. Okay, here it is. Boomerang on BET. So let me just show you guys the beginning clip of this.
Working the door at a gay club, but you ain't gay? That ain't my style, bro. You know something's not your style. You never tried out.
That relationship was toxic.
Okay, now let me come back to me. The video is for promoting this new show that's, I guess, a spinoff from Boomerang, the old school, movie with Eddie Murphy, Halle Berry, etc. But in the beginning, the guy asked him, how is he a straight man working the door at a gay club? And he says, that's not my thing. And he basically tries to influence him with his words, like, you don't know what you're into until you try it. And then they shoot to a screen, a visual of two men in a car kissing. And then directly after that, they're in a strip club with the women bent over, shaking it all, showing it, right? So the mind, F-U-C-K, in this one little clip, and I didn't even show the whole thing. If you don't believe that there is some sort of agenda when it comes to curtailing the minds of the Black community, and we could talk about population control, we could talk about, demoralizing and feminizing the Black man, we can talk about maintaining the power structure of the white man at the top, his woman underneath him, and then everything else underneath that. We can talk about pulling our people away from our spiritual selves, if that's a part of the equation. There's organized chaos, however you want to spin it. But anybody that will watch a clip like that, whether you are gay, straight, or not, and that does not cause concern for you, it's like, how do we separate ourselves from the broader context of humanity and only pay attention to our role? I'm a straight woman, so I only care about things that pertain to me. No, I am concerned about the world that my son is growing up in. I am concerned about some of the things that I hear happening in the LGBTQ community. I am concerned that the number of households that only had women in them, and that there was no strong manhood reflection to identify with. I'm concerned about the impact that has on the culture. I'm concerned about prison rape. We don't talk about prison rape. How many, if you want to go back to slavery, Amanda Seals, there were Black slaves, Black male slaves and boys that were being raped by their the master, men raping men on the plantation. Did this have any effect on the culture and where we are right now? Have we done a full-fledged study to find out what connection molestation in our communities for men and women, boys and girls, has to the broader concept of the homosexual community, for one, and then promiscuity in our communities, and then depression in our communities, and then mental illness in our communities, right? So we can't just like only focus on the parts of the narrative that fit whatever it is our agenda is, our comfortable agenda is for the day. That's not true to history. That's not true to truth. So this idea of using certain aspects of history in order to shape a certain narrative. Black men were not always powerless. Black men were not always victims of racism, white supremacy. What were those men doing? Those are supposed to be shouldn't they be the guiding force for us establishing concepts of what manhood is? Well, what were they doing? What were they teaching? What were they studying? What were they learning? Our history did not anywhere near start when we came to this country, and we do ourselves a major disservice by only focusing on that aspect of history. And I, like Amanda, am not an expert. I'm just giving you my perspective as a student of history. I also know for a fact that there is a scientific war that is happening that is affecting the male and female, not only the anatomy, but how we relate to one another. There are dying numbers, the numbers of men that are being born, boys that are being born around the world, that number is falling off continuously. What is that about? There's a lot of things that's happening on this planet that deserve real conversation, real introspection, but not only from me, but from everybody who has a voice and a platform. But the question is, do people really want to hear about that? Or are you only tuned in because I referenced Amanda Seales and Dwayne Wade? So share that with her if you want, or not, whether she sees it or not. I just want to reiterate to us that, especially as women, our responsibility is to have foresight and vision for 7 generations coming up behind us. So we have a role and responsibility to make sure that we continue to repopulate ourselves as a culture, as Black men and women, and as society in general. We have a role and responsibility in passing down wisdom, in respecting and understanding spiritual and universal laws. We have a role and a responsibility to create conversations and communities and relationships that are based around respecting men, loving men, protecting men, and vice versa when it comes to men and how they interact with women. And one more thing I want to say, I cannot underscore enough that on a spiritual level, there's a lot of rejection happening, and it's unconscious, maybe subconscious thing, where the world has had enough of what we consider to be the hierarchy of humanity, which has always, been, at least in modern times, the white man. So a lot of what I see happening on this planet is rejecting that notion. So straight female, straight male, no, I'm sorry. Rejecting the ideology of patriarchy and the white man being the highest subset, and this concept of what we have as of manhood. A lot of this comes from a symbolic means of rejecting that, right? So like the idea that, Snoop would come forward and apologize to Gayle King for the way that he talked to her, and then men actually being upset because he apologized and trying to make it seem like he was persuaded, or, you know what I'm saying? Certain celebrities came forward and they pushed him in the corner and made him do it, or they were going to sacrifice him or his son. Like, or maybe he just, as a man, heard another man speak to him with some wisdom into his ear and thought about his words and how dangerous his words could be as far as how they're received. And he did the right thing, which was to apologize to another woman, which took absolutely nothing away from him. That caveman mentality, whether it's black face, white face, Asian face, it doesn't matter. Like, that ideology is part of what is being rejected right now, and different people are playing it out. Some women are more masculinized, as we say, act like men, too strong, et cetera, because they are reacting to the world, reacting to life, so to speak. It plays itself out in a lot of different ways. And I don't want to get too beyond my point because I'll go way left and I don't want to do that. So don't misquote me when I say LGBTQ or homosexuality is a mutation, and don't make it weird. I contextualized that. I gave it full premise, right? And still honor and value and respect the choices, the livelihood, and all of our right and aspect to free will. But I also, as a woman and as a Black woman, take full accountability and responsibility of my role for 7 generations coming behind me. I know that the media has continuously focused on emasculating Black men. I know that the prison system, the school systems, the economic system, every different aspect of our infrastructure here is predicated on emasculating and demeaning Black men. So if we'll say that that could be a reason for homophobia in the Black community, then we also have to express that that could also be a reasoning for the actual effeminization of men, the actual subjugation of men, and some of the decisions that some men make. Not all men. I don't know if you were born gay. I don't care. But I'm looking at all of the things that center around this conversation that really aren't being talked about, that all of us, gay, straight, Black, white, Asian, Mexican, Latino, whatever, should be mindful of and conscious of. We're so keen on talking about the planet right now. The planet is earthquakes and pestilence and fires and, you know what I'm saying? What if the planet is responding to humanity and our state of consciousness, how we conduct ourselves, how we carry ourselves, and how far away we're getting from the center? That's my personal question for all of us. And however you take that, you can take it, you can conceptualize it, or you can throw it in the garbage. It doesn't matter to me. But I really needed to say that because we cannot play with history and try to make history fit the narrative that we want it to fit in order to make what we're doing today feel good or feel like it's what we should be doing. Everybody has their individual lives and their individual choices, but we still have to respect science. We have to respect spiritual and universal laws, and we have to respect the hierarchy of what governs our culture and our society. As far as, and I say all of that with love, as far as Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, I think it is shameful. And I can't remember if I did a video. I might have touched on this briefly in another video that I did. But I think it is absolutely shameful that they are putting this young boy out into the spotlight and making him a face of whether it's an agenda, whether it's their personal choices, whether it's their personal preference, whatever the end goal is, the end game is. I think it is a travesty and an absolute shame that this boy is being thrust into the public, that he has millions, if not tens of millions of people that are energetically focused on him. That is too much of a burden for any human being, let alone a child, to have to deal with. And I'm curious to know if 10 years from now, if he decides, meets a woman and falls in love, has children, and changes the trajectory of his life, if Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade are going to go on a world tour, apologizing to the rest of the world for throwing their son out and using him as a face of, or to represent some sort of narrative of free choice, of live and let live, et cetera, et cetera. He's way too young. The only thing that child should be focused on right now is being around pure positive energy, getting love and getting the right type of energy and guidance and acculturation in order to help him find his way. And I will say, I don't know him. I don't presume to say that what he's feeling is not accurate or true. I would never do that, child or grown up or at all. But I do know that once you get into those upper echelon aspects of society, the higher you go, the more deviant the behavior becomes. In those schools and in those environments with these rich kids that have access to nothing but access to nothing but access, a lot of things happen in those environments that don't really happen when you live down here with us common folk, you know what I mean? Where people kind of look at you sideways and question how you move. So I don't know if that plays into the role of his son. I mention that because a lot of these celebrities are setting a standard and a tone for how people are governing their lives, but they don't live in the same world that we live in. A lot of these people live in bubbles. So they are surrounded by people that fit a certain narrative, or that only want to be around people like them, or that have money, have wealth, have influence, have access. And none of that equates to wisdom. And none of that equates to being spiritually grounded or of being sound minded. So I really had an affinity for Gabrielle Union. She was one of the sisters that I always kind of looked to, like, yeah, she's dope, she's intelligent. Don't always agree with everything she says, don't need to always agree with everything she says, but she represents a higher standard of intelligence and gracefulness, right? But ever since this whole thing, it's like she went on her Instagram and was like, I'm built for this, you know, I see it all. Like, this isn't about you. This isn't even about Dwayne Wade. This is about this little boy who is obviously trying to find his way in whatever he identifies with himself. I don't care. He's a child. And as a parent, I would never, ever put my son in energetic harm's way by thrusting him out into the public to be consumed by and picked apart by people who don't even know him. The last thing I want to say is that everything is not always an agenda. Some of these Black people, some of these Black celebrities are operating on their own, you know what I'm saying, reconnaissance, if that's the word I want to use. Like, they don't all have puppet strings in their back, some directly, some indirectly, but like, let's be clear, some of these people are operating on their own merits, doing what they think is best for themselves and in their families. They don't always have to have somebody behind the scenes playing the fiddle. Is there usually somebody behind the scenes playing the fiddle? Sure, but not always. And again, all of us have full autonomy to make the decisions that we make in our lives, to do as we please, to live our lives the way that we choose to live them. And again, live and let live. I want to, you know, operate from an energy and a mindset and a culture of love, but I also don't ever want to not deal with the reality, the truth, the spiritual groundedness, and the history and the culture that we come from in order to help us to shape and mold the culture that we're creating. ZaZaAli.com is my website. You can access all of my books, my workbooks, my content there. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let's see, how long did I talk? I don't know, but ZaZaAli.com is my website. Peace and love.